Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. Are you all right?
Yeah, really good. I've seen a lot of you recently with various events we've been doing. We'll talk about that later on. We've got quite a lot of things to discuss, and this is a kind of just a flying solo episode, isn't it? So I'm looking forward to this. We've got a ton of things to talk about. So I saw on Twitter today that you were standing in what looked to me like the O2 of educational events, doing like with these enormous screens and big slides behind you, and you were talking about how you were dressed to match the screens. but it was about early career teachers, and I know that early career framework is a huge thing that everyone is now talking about in England because it's just started officially around the country. So do you want to just tell people kind of what it is and what sort of thing you were doing today?
Well, yeah, I accidentally matched the slides. That was not intentional. They weren't my slide. They're like the introductory slides. And I was in a green dress standing on a stage in front of green slides. So the message I was sending to early career teachers is always match your presentation. But the early career framework is a national rollout, sort of national programme. And it's a statutory entitlement to professional development for all teachers who are entering the profession after their initial training. So whereas before nationally there were pockets of excellent practice and support for early career teachers, that wasn't the picture everywhere. And some early career teachers, some NQTs and RQTs, weren't getting the best deal in terms of mentoring and support. So the early career framework recognises the importance of early mentoring. It recognises the importance of ongoing high quality professional development, and it's kind of pulled together in this national programme for all early career teachers. And it's not an assessment route. It's actually, you will get access to really high quality training, both face-to-face, online, at regional events, local events, self-study, but also regular meeting with a trained mentor to use things like instructional coaching to look at really developing teaching and learning. And whereas before lots of NQT programs were just 1 year, this is a 2-year program of sort of access to CPD. And today was the first event that we did in our region for the actual early career teachers. We've done the mentoring one, so we trained all the mentors, and today was the big launch. But I was just as surprised as you were, Tom, when I walked into that room and it did look like the O2. It was absolutely enormous. But I think that just goes to show the kind of the scale of the project as well, about training an entire cohort of new teachers and the importance of the programme, and also quite scarily the potential impact that it can have, because it was amazing to see so many teachers, early career teachers, in one room at the same time.
And it is amazing. I mean, it's worth sort of taking stock of the fact that, I mean, you've had that experience. And where was that? Just give us, where was that in?
It was through the Flying High Teaching School Hub, which is our local teaching school hub. So it was based in Nottingham. So it was people all from Leicestershire, Leicester City, Nottinghamshire, and a lot of the surrounding areas. So there were multiple trusts who were working with this Flying High. And it was just amazing to see all these hundreds of teachers. And it was everybody from across the sector. It was sort of early years, primary, secondary, special. But then we were grouped into sort of local kind of demographic type groups. So
that going on in Nottingham. Last week I was in a school in London, in Camden, where it's the same. So I was at the school end, so talking to some of the ECTs and their mentors, and then seeing what's it like from their perspective. They've got to know the sort of framework. They've got to have someone who's sort of coordinating these mentors. There are 10 ECTs. They've each got a mentor, and they're doing this sort of school-based thing. But they've also then got the kind of central thing, a bit like yours. Yeah. And there's a lot of coordinating to go on, and a lot of people are sort of finding their feet with the sequencing of all of that and how to kind of make it not sort of almost too much for the teachers. Yeah. So they're already. How are you finding that where you are?
It's interesting because it's a real shift. I mean, we had a really robust program beforehand anyway. We were quite, I don't mean ahead of the curve, but it was a real priority in our area. And I was lucky enough to be on the early rollout program last year with it. So I facilitated and presented on the course last year. So there was time to kind of have a little bit of a tinker with the structure and the sequencing and the content. So this year, it's really nice to see it kind of quite big. But I know lots of people are getting in a bit of a ravel with, there's lots of new terminology. There's lots of, what the mentor does now compared to what a mentor would have done historically. You know, the difference between a mentor and an induction tutor, the difference between PPA time and ECT time, and there's lots of things for people to get their heads around. And I think, like I said, it's got huge potential, but I think that we're in this period of bedding down at the moment where everybody's trying to get to grips with it. And we've had some feedback about accessing the platform, because a lot of it's virtual, a lot of it's online and webinars, which is a huge shift from everybody having to gather in a room to some bits being in a room and some bits being online. So it's kind of, I won't say suck it and see, because there is strategy behind it, but there is,
of course, yeah. But
definitely going to be a lot of feedback.
And it's quite impressive really to see a system kind of do this, where you've got big change, but then you can hear bits of people react, and maybe that's inevitable. There's a natural implementation kind of hump to get over, where too big, a bit too rigid, and then that's probably people should just understand that's just inevitable. It's not like don't fight it. It's going to feel like that, but in the long run, it will blend into just the mechanics of how schools work. But I think one of the things I've picked up on, which is an interesting sort of dilemma, which is when you're a new teacher, you have to plan lessons and you have to manage the behaviour, and you have to start thinking about curriculum and assessment and pedagogical things right from the beginning, because you just have the lessons to teach. But of course, when you've got a programme, it might be saying, like, this block we're doing the behaviour and expectations, routine stuff from the early career framework, and next block of inputs is around the model of learning and the theories of learning, and then we'll come to feedback and assessment later. So you've got this sort of interesting tension of people needing stuff now, but they're not really getting the input on it till later. So have you come across that?
Well, it's interesting about the sequencing, because today it was a blend of behaviour and classroom culture. So it was all about setting the tone in your classroom, and behaviours, routines, norms, that kind of thing, and cognitive architecture. So they were getting the kind of behaviour side of it and a little bit of the kind of understanding how we learn side of it together. But there is wriggle room, because the kind of professional learning part is sequenced deliberately to try and coincide with what they might need at that point. So this time of year, everybody is still trying to get to grips with culture, behaviour, running the room, basically, to quote Tom Bennett. So that's what this unit focuses on. But because they have their weekly meetings with their mentor as well, which is all scheduled in and all fitted around kind of instructional coaching, there is the wriggle room to then do the bespoke bit as well. So you'll do all the theory and the learning around this in this particular sequence. But if what you need to do is not that, and it's something else, if the wheels are coming off or there's a particular area you need to develop, there is that space with your mentor to do a kind of bespoke bit alongside it. But it is potentially very powerful, but I know what you mean about the sequencing. I don't doubt that we'll get to the end of the year and go, oh, that probably should have come before that.
I don't think I would even be saying like it shouldn't be like that. It's just one of those sort of almost inherent things. Like it makes sense to do chunks of formal learning about things. I've got so many questions about it. I mean, we had some really good, perhaps we should reference this now. We had our last two guests. We had Hailey Hughes, who's like the kind of, I don't know whether we should call her the queen or the goddess of mentoring, but something like that.
Yeah.
You know, the big cheese of someone who's really doing some like groundbreaking kind of communication about mentoring and making mentoring a thing to notice, which is really great. And her book is excellent. And then Sam Twistleton, who's obviously someone who's, although she was quite quick to sort of dispel this sort of sense that she is not responsible for the ECF, but she was part of this whole career retention thing, which led to it. And she's really clued into this whole debate about initial teacher training versus initial teacher education and everything. So I find the whole thing interesting. Do you think the teachers coming in, though, are like, have they done some of this stuff already, a lot of it? Are they some of them saying, but we did this in our courses before?
Were you at my session today?
No, I wish I had.
Only because I was laughing because my skit cohort, because I do some guest lecturing on our skit, and the cognitive architecture bit that is in the particular programme that we were running today was very, very similar in terms of level to what I know my skit cohort have done. So There is repetition, but the point that the ECTs made themselves today was when we were learning about it on our skit, we were learning about it a lot in terms of the theory, and we were learning it in conjunction with so much else at the same time. Now we're coming back to look at it. We're looking at it through a different lens. We're looking at it through, when I go back into class tomorrow and this is my actual class that I'm dealing with, what does it look like now? So there is a repetition, but I think it's looking at that same content in a completely different way. Like, I am now responsible for this. I've got to deliver on this. And you're not doing it in a kind of learning it to write an assignment or learning it to have a little go in your classroom. It's learning it now to make it work on the ground. And I was a little bit concerned that there was a potential repetition, but the early career teachers themselves said, we're looking at this completely differently. So, yeah, I think there's a potential for a clash or an overlap or a...
as long as you give people the sort of professional or kind of grown-up respect of acknowledging that you're not assuming they know nothing, and I think that's when people get annoyed. It's a bit like children. Like we always have this joke in our family, which is about my brother when he was a kid, when he first went to school, and in his first lessons at school, they had this game where you had like dice faces and they had to add them up, and he said, so. No, if we had a 3 on one and a 4 on another, that would be 7. And if it's a 2 and a 3, it would be 5. And my mum said, okay, so if it was a 4 and a 5, what would that be? And he said, oh, no, we don't do 9s. which I thought was quite funny, because that's this whole thing that he already knew the answers. He wasn't really learning the maths because he already knew it. But it's like the sort of thing, if you kind of like, we always talk about that, we don't do 9s joke, to sort of implicate this sort of, it's kind of frustrating if people are saying, hey, let me tell you something that you've never heard, when you have. Yeah. But then I find every time I go into a school, I could just say yesterday I was in a school doing quite a training day with a lot of people, primary and secondary. And when I was saying to them, I make jokes about the same things like, oh, we did cold calling last year. It's like as if like you can just tick it off, and everyone was acknowledging that. People were coming up to me afterwards going, "Oh my god, that's so true." People literally say that like they've nailed it, and no one ever has. That's the truth. Yeah. So going through these things, I think this thing about the education side of it is interesting. Because I've thought about a lot since we spoke to Sam Twistleton, that I do really think that making teachers understand about the philosophy and value system that they're going into and coming into the profession with a bit of kind of having had time to think about the purposes of education and things is important, as well as, can I run a room? And in a way, until you're kind of in a room to run, it's a little bit abstract. And of course, we have teacher placements, but I'm quite relaxed about that idea that PGCEs can be quite academic before you come into school. But some people get quite agitated that we should be kind of like classroom ready on day one. What do you think?
I genuinely think, without wanting to sit on the fence, that there has to be that blend of it. You have
to. That is sitting on the fence.
They have to know why they want to do the job and what the purpose of education is and what they actually believe, and some of the big thinkers around education. They need to know where their place in the system kind of potentially could fit. But also, you don't want to have people in a room who can only kind of pontificate about things and not actually get a job of work done. So you do need that blend of understanding why we educate and what the purpose of education is, and some of the kind of thinking around child development and all those sorts of things. But also you need to be, knowing about a theory isn't going to help you with a wet playtime on a day like today when the kids are kind of wild and it's been windy outside. You've got to be able to know how to do the practical bits. And I think that if you have one without the other, then that is a very deficit model. You can't just be a mechanic type teacher, and you can't just be a kind of theory-driven teacher.
No, and it's not like one ends, is it? So it's a bit like you need a taste of both, go into teaching, and then this is where CPD systems are so important, because you need to be able to carry on the discussion about both. Yeah. Like, I'm trying to hone my craft, but I'm also need some space and time to think about why we're doing things and carry on that wider discussion. And I think sometimes people feel they did all that and they park it, but some good CPD which says let's discuss this and talk about our values and everything Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a case. I mean, I'm surprised. So yesterday, and I don't know, sort of pinpoint a particular school, because by the time this goes out, no one will remember where yesterday was. But show of hands, how many of you have read? I mean, literally, the day was about Rosenshine's Principles for Instruction, and they asked me to go in, and they said they'd already started it last year. Only about, one in 8 people, something like that, had read it. Actually, even though they'd all been given it, only about 3 people out of about 100 had read Dan Willingham's Why Don't Students Like School? They didn't know about it. And not many people had read Inside the Black Box by Dylan Williams. So I'm thinking, for me, and nobody had read The Trivium by Martin Robinson. And I would say, honestly, I mean, I would say if I was running a course, read The Trivium, read Inside the Black Box, read Dan Willingham's Why Don't Students Like School, and read Rosenshine's Principles. And you got the tool, you've got the material for a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
But maybe obviously there are other things to read, but I'm always surprised at how few people have read these things, which I consider to be totally core. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's just because school is so fast-paced and it's so busy and it's so physically and emotionally and mentally exhausting that there just isn't the energy or the space to then upload even more information. And I think that a lot of teachers would absolutely love the time and space to actually be able to read at length. But especially in the last sort of 15 months, the nature of the role has been so draining and so fast that there's just not the headspace. And I think if you are designing a CPD program, then time for reading actually needs to be built into the program rather than a kind of extra, because teachers are already working the most ridiculous hours to then...
So it's great when people do this sort of like reading club or bring the reading. Here's the reading, let's read it. I do agree with that. And I'm always very sympathetic to someone who says, yeah, look, I haven't read those books. I have read, thank you very much. But I have read all these books about geography, because I'm a geography teacher, and I've read, and they could come back to me with, I've read in my subject discipline, and that's their main sense of how they're holding their craft through thinking about history, geography, maths. And
that's why I love books by people like Peps McRae, because they are genuinely readable in like half an hour or 45 minutes, because it's so precise. But things that just go on and on and on and on and on and on forever are just they're just too.
I know. It's the thin books. It's this. I mean, this.
Yeah.
It's 18 pages of gold.
See, look. That's 3 books. You could get through those in no time at all.
Well, we're going to get Peps on this show at some point. But I mean, I think we've had some really good discussions about this stuff. It's so interesting. I'm loving seeing the sort of system rollout in action and the debates. Something that's comes up quite a lot. I feel like I haven't met anyone yet who doesn't think this, which is that the materials that are being produced are sort of imagine there's infinite time. So there's kind of these scripted dialogues, and I've not met a single person yet who says, oh yeah, they're really great because we use them and they structure our conversations around them and they're useful. They're just going, they're way too long. They're totally unrealistic, and no one seems to be like loving that. So what do you feel that, or do you feel like I'm being
in the ECF?
Yeah, in some of them, in some of the pro platforms that have got these contracts and stuff, their materials are very strongly scripted.
I can only comment on the provider that we're using, but they are usable. They are busy. There's lots in them. And it's interesting that you were saying about reading and what to read, because all of the stuff is drawn from a very specific reading list, which includes things like Rosenstein. But if you followed it to the absolute letter, like minute by minute, it is very packed. But like anything that's written for a generic audience, the skill and the craft is in the deciding what's right for those people in front of you. So I think the people who are actually kind of delivering and presenting and facilitating have been chosen very carefully to be experts in delivery, to realise that actually this group might not need that long on this, and the timings are all suggested, and as in they are a suggestion, they're not a law, and the sequencing is suggested. You can tinker with it. There is a recognition that depending on the demographic that you work in, you're going to need to tailor the content a little bit. So yes, it's scripted, but that script is a suggested script, and kind of as long as you cover that, and as long as you've made those points, you can do it. You don't have to stand there and kind of...
No.
Not with our provider anyway. It's a very sensible provider that we're using.
Well, I met someone recently who a nameless person who'd been on one of these sort of providers courses for facilitators on the national professional qualifications things, and they were saying they were just kind of raging about there's almost like this expert reversal thing, like when you do the job and you know it and you know how to run conversations, having this sort of thing of the fidelity. They kept on saying it's about the fidelity. They must use the word fidelity. It's like the fidelity of the materials. Like you've got to, because everyone has to do it across the country in different places, so they want it to be done the same, which is a good aim. The truth is that people are inherently not the same. So you kind of need to say, look, I'm a firm believer in like frameworks, the things which are a general framework to reference, but then knowing that people will definitely take them in different ways because they are human, and I think you have to embrace that.
And you can't script it. If you're delivering to a room full of people who work in early years and key stage 1, you cannot use the same script as people who are teaching with sort of post 16. It's a nonsense. So yes, there is a suggested script, but you have to know who you're dealing with, know your audience. In the same way that the national curriculum is statutory, but the enactment of that is going to look and feel very different in classrooms across the country because of the needs of the audience. So you can prescribe it as much as you like, really tightly, but there will always be a difference, and there should be, because you can't have a one size fits all, because otherwise it becomes so generic as to be useless. It doesn't.
That's true. Which actually brings me on to the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I think we've talked about, if you can talk about that, it's exciting, isn't it, working with teachers? But you and I both did this event at the weekend, which is an exciting thing to do. And I'm really grateful that you supported us, which was the EduGive UK Curriculum Conference that we hosted online. And just to say to people who don't know anything about it, that was an event which I organised with my daughter Daisy, and we decided to try to raise some money for Fair Share, and we were trying to think of ways to do that, and we decided that a conference where people would get something really good value, which would raise money. So we had 25 webinars. Emma and I both did one each, and there were 20 I can't do the maths. Well, 23 other people, and people gave their time for free, and we charged £50, and we raised, with some sponsors from Schools Week and John Catt and elsewhere, drum roll, we raised £32,000, which I think was epic. It was just, we couldn't believe it when the tickets were coming in, and we kept on texting each other. My daughter going, "Oh my God, 150, 200, 250. People, more and more people were buying tickets. Anyway, it was all about curriculum, and I sat through 2 days of one after the other, 19 of the sessions, and then I've watched some of the videos of people who left them afterwards. It's like, we've got some clever people out there, and there were some really interesting ideas that came through. So, I mean, what your whole thing was amazing. Do you want to just, in a nutshell, summarize? Because I think your talk was one of those which really, I think captured the spirit of quite a few other ones, and so I think it was worth sort of just summarising. Tell people what yours was about.
I was trying to articulate the fact that in primary, especially, we have this really massively overstuffed curriculum, because we have to sort of teach between sort of 10 and 12 curriculum areas, and this old traditional model of every half term you might do 1 or 2 units of a subject. So potentially you've got like 9 units per subject per year, and then you multiply that out and you end up with this unbelievably overstuffed curriculum. And then you wonder why nobody remembers anything. Nobody can kind of retain anything that's been taught. And I think I compared it to a freak shake everything just stuffed in, and everybody leaves just feeling a little bit sick after they've kind of had an interaction with it. But I was also trying to point out the fact that a really good curriculum has a really clear kind of strategic direction and vision to it. And if you can articulate that, where you're going, what you're doing with it, what you want to achieve, what you want that child at your end of phase to look like, that's what should drive your curriculum. And that not for too long, but we have had a really kind of sharp focus on knowledge and skill and planning those and sequencing those. And potentially we've not lost sight of, but we need to also think a little bit more widely about our curriculum offer, about the children, the young people that we want to develop a little bit further than just the knowledge and skill, which is very important. But that goes back to the kind of strategic vision, what you want to achieve. So it was looking at our overstuffed curriculum and trying to be a little bit more strategic about how we organise it in terms of what we actually want the outcomes to be.
I just thought, and you showed a sort of picture of, like those sort of units visualized. You're thinking, like, even if it's half that number, it would be like, okay, there's a lot of dots, a lot of units to plan in maths and science and writing, in history, term 1, term 2, term 3. And you think, just in the total scale of the total number of units of learning, we think, what are the students supposed to know? What experiences should they have? How do we sequence that? How does it connect to what they learned before? How does it build a platform for what comes afterwards? And it's like, whereas if so you've got to have lines of thinking which are kind of almost beyond what's realistically possible, isn't it? So it is about stripping, which linked into, there are a couple of other talks. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I hope people, I think Daisy and I are going to think of a mechanism for people to still buy access to these resources, even though the event has finished. But there were two who really were saying the same thing as that. One of them was Rich Kennett, who did a fantastic talk about less is more. And he described it almost from the lesson, the unit level. So he talked about line managing a geography department where they had produced this unit of 9 lessons, and he went through it one by one. And he was saying they're going to do a lesson on this, a lesson on that, a lesson on this, a lesson on that, a lesson on this. And it's like, it's too much. It's too much, and it's sort of tenuous knowledge. Then a bit of tenuous, and I can see the students in that unit just going, I've been battered by. And so he worked with them to strip it back and say, let's do a unit and then consolidate, and then a case study, and then another one, and link it to the local area. And then it was just, what he showed us was the difference was so much better, deeper, but less. And then, the stuff they were not going to teach, they were never going to teach. And so that becomes the kind of the hinterland, the kind of like, and there's some other stuff we haven't got time to teach you. Kind of, here it is. But that took really like deliberate thinking and a kind of courage to say, we're not going to teach that. And so that's what you're saying in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and there is so much especially in the primary curriculum, you just really don't need. It's not actually going to serve the children particularly well. And I'm probably speaking out of turn here, but I'm a really great believer that if a child leaves primary school being a fluent reader who can write reasonably well and coherently and structure an argument and write a story, who's numerate and can use all 4 operations and is a jolly nice person, then they are ready for secondary and everything else. And I'm not sort of saying that don't do history, don't do geography, but actually the core purpose of primary is to get children to be able to function with each other and also to read and to write and to understand maths. Because if they leave knowing all about a Roman gladiator or an oxbow lake, that's marvellous. But if they leave with that and they can't read properly and they can't write properly, then it doesn't matter how the secondary curriculum is structured, because they're not going to be able to access it. So we really need to focus in primary on getting all of those basic things really, really secure. That is the biggest service we can give those children, is to have them as competent, confident, capable readers who can write and access everything. If we don't do that, I think
what's happening there, because obviously, I mean, and Alex Quigley did a superb session about reading and the need to he exemplified once again just how ambitious we are. He sort of was going all the way up to A level. He was saying, look at the reading list. If you're doing 3 or 4 A levels, look at the reading lists that the teachers are setting you. It's extensive, and reading. So I get that, and I've heard some other people saying, look, let's be honest, like we we do need to focus on reading and numeracy, maths at primary. Yes, we do. We shouldn't be sort of having to sort of pretend we're not. But at the same time, we've got this other content. Now, people like Christine Council, I think she's great at sort of showing how you weave it together and in a lean way. And this is where John Hutchinson, who from Reach, Feltham, and in his sort of changing roles as he's gone through working across schools now, because he had this really good way of sort of saying, look, here's knowledge organisers, and he was sort of showing them, here's a knowledge organiser, here's another one, 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 here's a booklet, here's a booklet, here's a booklet. Yeah. And each one of them on their own terms feels like impressive if you're saying, look at what children can do in year 4, in year 5, in year 6, in terms of knowledge. But he was sort of saying, well, they're starting to think, yeah, but what does it actually add up to? Because it's just too many things. And then they're thinking now, having gone down that path for a while, to start saying, let's think more deeply actually about the links between those. So if we focus more on the links and the path through 3, 4, 5, 6, the depth around that path can be, we can compromise a bit on that so that we're building a stronger path.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say about the train, the little train. Yeah. It's got to be lean. It's got to be like that kind of connected.
What is your name? A train, not a traffic jam.
Train, not a traffic jam, because people are planning these individual units of work, and they may be, like I said in there, because I got that picture of that very busy road with a big traffic jam. They may be the most like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, or they must be amazing. You've got this knowledge organizer and that booklet and It's beautiful, a thing of beauty, but actually it doesn't connect to anything. It's not part of an ongoing thread that's actually incremental and developmental and strategic. It's just lots and lots of disparate bits and bobs, and we're kind of polishing all the little individual disparate parts without actually thinking about what, like you say, what does it build to? What's that end point?
But a bit like with the rollout thing for the ECTCF, I feel like some people will roll their eyes at all this and go, well, you see, I could have told you that. But I don't think that way. I think this is a natural and healthy process that actually, let's see how ambitious we can be with the knowledge depth at primary and at secondary. But then, having explored that, let's actually remember the bigger picture, and then we find the kind of optimum curriculum. So I think that was so interesting to hear some of those details. But then the other theme, this is what I loved, which is where, again, I mean, you talk about this all the time, and the other theme that came out of the EduGive conference, I thought, was exemplified by someone like Deborah Kidd and Martin Robinson, and Jeffrey Boakye, who were saying, you've got to teach the children who are in front of you, and also Howell Roberts. He was just absolutely amazing. So I'll never forget this story about Maxwell, who's in primary and is doing the Romans, and he's talking about, I hate them. Why, Maxwell? Why do you hate the Romans? Because, well, they were ages ago. And it's like, how do I make Maxwell care about the Romans? Was brilliant. And this is the whole thing that Jeffrey was talking about it, Martin Robinson. The knowledge that children have is theirs. They're the ones that have to perceive it, to make sense of it, to link it to what they know from their world. Yeah. And too often teachers don't find the time and the space in lessons and in the curriculum to think, how do I bring you people, my actual students, into this and make it feel yours? Yeah. It's too like letterbox style, like I'm giving you stuff. And alongside that, I thought was such a strong theme.
Yeah, and alongside that is also, we kind of have to take a step back sometimes and look at the curriculum and say, right, especially in primary where we haven't necessarily got an exam syllabus to follow, necessarily set text or anything, is to actually think of all the knowledge and all of the things that have ever happened in the universe. I've picked this. And sometimes some of the units that we use in school, it's no wonder that Maxwell goes, oh, I hate them, or the equivalents of Maxwell, because we have to look at, it's not that we just do, we do this unit here and that unit there. It's actually take a step back and think of the entire history of the entire world and science and geography, everything we know. We've decided to curate it in a way and present this to you. And you look at some of the units being taught and you think, why are we doing this? how does it serve the children, and how is it relevant to them in their understanding of the world? And I think the idea of curriculum review and relevance is so important, because even sort of 5-10 years ago, I mean, children are inherently the same. But children's lived experiences are very, very different now. And we need to kind of keep pace with making things, I don't mean kind of being all whizzy-bangy and making like a children's TV presenter, but just that recognition that their lives are very different from even 5-10 years ago. And we need to serve them with things that will be enticing. I
feel like, in a way, I think this discussion isn't necessarily about, say, making the curriculum tailored to kind of their precise. No. But it's about bridging. It's bridging from their world to what we want. Yeah. So like with Benny Cara's brilliant stuff about story, and story comes through all the time. It's like, I want you to know about the Romans, because that's important. And how would you know they were important? You're just a kid, but they were, let me tell you. But you've got to sort of say, I can't just keep shoving that at you. I've got to bring you into that story so you feel some relevance. And I've got to work hard at that. I can't just keep telling you the facts. I've got to think of ways of. Yeah. So stories. One of the things I think I was thinking about a lot all those 2 days was about giving kids the time to talk through the way they've understood something. So you read them a passage or a story, you talk about something. So what do you think is happening? Well, how do you feel about this? What is it telling you? Why do you think this is important? And giving students that chance to air their perspectives. Anyway, I mean, I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, and that goes back to space in the curriculum, doesn't it? Because
exactly.
In conversations, if you've got an overstuffed curriculum that you're having to hurtle through at 1,000 miles an hour, because it's all about coverage and content rather than structure and sequencing and connection making. So I think that if you're going, you kind of need to have the approach to teaching and learning and the curriculum development go really hand in hand and say, what do we value in terms of the way that children learn and the opportunities, the kind of learning opportunities we want, allied with what do we want our curriculum content to look like? Because the two have got to go together. If you value discussion and you value kind of reflection, does your curriculum allow space for that? And we kind of need to teach and learning questions alongside the content and sequencing questions. Otherwise, we're just going to always end up going vroom, and it's just going to be about quick, practice, quick. Remember stuff.
It's one of my beefs at the moment, which is kids doing quizzes on stuff they've never learned. It's like, no, look, you have to teach it to them first.
Yeah.
The retrieval practice is like, can I practice remembering it so that I can explain it deeply? But if they never knew it or understood it, that's not in it. It's like being quizzed on stuff I've never learned. It's odd, but it makes a lot of sense. But it does mean we have to have the courage to say, look, less is more. It's a trite thing to say in a sense, but it really does mean it in this way. Like Rich Kennett's geography model unit, it did this thing of finding space in the geography unit on rivers to say the river we care about is this river here in our city. Look at it. It's amazing. And look what its history is. It's amazing. And this is your place, your city. And let's think about rivers being something which is actually connected to you, rather than whiz through rivers and do glaciers, neither of which you can connect to because we haven't got time to discuss that. And to me, that was a really good example of deliberately finding the space, making the deliberate sort of sacrifice of a bit of curriculum so that you make it, the bit you do teach, deeper and richer. Anyway, I love that. The last thing that I think we haven't got perhaps time to discuss now was the whole strand around leadership and implementation. So James Mannion, we have to get him on this. He was epic talking about, and also Nimish Ladd, who we've also had on here, talking about this real challenge of taking an idea and making it happen. And John Tomset and Mary Meyer, their stuff around talking to curriculum leaders, like people bursting with ideas. But then we've got to actually turn it into stuff the students actually do it. And that journey is not a given. You've got to really think through, how do I make it happen? It's so interesting.
Yeah, and it's a real issue in primary as well, because when you're leading a department in secondary, you've got your department subjects to focus on, and that's it. So when you're trying to implement something in primary, you've only got the same number of staff meeting times, you've only got the same number, but you have to split that so many more ways. So it's looking at the potential implementation rates across the sector as well, because it might be that an actual department in a secondary can be more agile because they've only got one subject or two subjects to focus on. Whereas in primary, you're trying to develop up to kind of 12 subject areas at once with the same finite amount of professional development time. So you kind of have to think a little bit more in primary about what you actually want to develop and how you're going to do that. Because the model of implementation, although the principles would be the same, the actual enactment of that would probably be a lot different because you're dealing with so many more strands, if you like.
Yeah, so again, so you have to be so strategic and say, like, I know a school where, I mean, I think they've done a great job. They've just said, we felt science wasn't something we were great at, so they went like, here's our calendar, session 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are the science. We're doing science.
Yeah.
We're going to, and then that was their main sort of curriculum development focus on top of the kind of team need driven stuff. And that seems very useful. I mean, where you just have to just say, well, why isn't it history and geography? Well, because we're doing science and this year, and we'll give that a push, and then another year we'll do. And
but that comes around as well. You know, the new inspection framework, where I do think it's unfair that primaries are inspected in terms of subject leadership in the same way as secondaries, because you can't have that sustained focus on one thing because it is spread that number of ways. And I do think that primaries get a bit of a raw deal in terms of subject inspection because the criteria is the same, but you've got a head of department in secondary and a second in department all focusing on, I don't know, just English, whereas in primary, you know, you're expecting the same from somebody who might get one staff meeting every 6 months.
I know it's so hard, and you know, and people. The thing is that people have got the spirit. They're sort of plugging away at it. One of the things I always think is interesting in curriculum terms that I've seen in my time was a Saffron Walden County High School, which is one of my favourite schools because it's so good. It's just like it's got a lot going for it, but it's also got some amazing teachers there and leaders. And they have one of the best bits of teaching I've ever seen was a textiles unit in year 8, and it was the only textiles they do ever. Like that's it, because they found time for it. It's about 8 weeks of work, something like that. And they wove their own sort of fabrics, and they made bags out of it, and they made them these beautiful black portfolios. It's sort of like books to tell the story of they'll do it. They were wonderful. So what they made in this time was so high quality. I was thinking, I actually don't think I've ever seen DT work as good as that. And they did it in that unit. And I thought, that means that you don't have to have like, you know, sometimes it's valuable to have that experience, and everyone has it, and it's high quality. And that is a good learning experience in the whole totality. It doesn't have to be the sort of total grind of stuff week after week forever in every subject. And so you can have this sort of bits and bobs. And I've seen, I guess, similar in primary, some units just stand alone sitting there and they do a job, and that's fine.
Yeah, and it's about having wriggle room in your curriculum planning to do that as well. Because what we tend to do is we think, right, we've got 38, 39 weeks, we're going to stuff it to the gills, we're going to plan every week, you know. And actually, you really shouldn't, because there needs to be wriggle room to respond to things that are going on. You know, if it's a year where there's the Olympics or there's an election, or, you know, it's something that you want the children to learn about and know about. If your curriculum rammed to the rafters with everything, there's not the space to actually say, look out the window, look what's happening in the world. I'm not talking about driving to school one day and it's foggy and let's all write a one foggy day story. I'm not talking about that. But it's actually, I know teachers who have done that, but they're
it was a foggy day.
Yeah. But space in your curriculum to be responsive to things. Yeah. And I think that we lose sight of that, as well as about the fact that we are educating young people who live in a kind of dynamic world, and there needs to be a kind of fortuitous dynamism opportunity in our curriculum to be able to actually respond to those things and to talk about them in a meaningful way and to do work around them. So I think one of the things would be, when we're stripping back your curriculum, is, you know, are there any gaps? Is there any wriggle room? Is there any space for something that comes up? It might be something happening in your local area, a bit of local history that's going on, or a centenary of your school, wherever it is. But just providing that space for teachers to really potentially excel in their area as well. It might be a space for specialist teachers in the school to really do something school-wide, or just a little bit less prescriptive and
It doesn't have to be everyone, does it? So you can have, like, as long as the core, you can have a bit of this and that, and some teachers teach something very specific, and not every English teacher has to all do all the same text, but as long as the main ones are common, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, we could talk about this a long time. I just thought because I was hosting it along with you and Nimish. To have to listen to all these ideas, it was just amazing. I mean, it's quite a marathon. I mean, sort of on one day we did 10 50 minutes chunks.
Wow.
It's pretty like saturated at the end of the day, but each person's thinking is so great. And I love the fact we have so many great thinkers in our world that we can listen to. So let's finish there. It's great talking to you as always.
Thank you, and you, and thank you so much for organising that event as well, Tom. Hats off, really. That was absolutely amazing what you pulled together there, and I think so many schools will use those resources, and it'll have such a big impact because it was just brilliant. So, on behalf of everybody, thank you.
It wasn't exactly Live Aid, but I did feel like a mini Bob Geldof, because we asked everybody to do something. Everyone says yes. Everyone goes. Everyone's so kind. Everyone goes, yeah, I'd love to. And so
you should have called it. Do they know it's curriculum?
No, don't even go there with that song. It's the slight dark side of Live Aid that the lyrics.
I know.
Well, let's finish there before we get to deep water. Okay, everybody, look, thank you so much for listening to our podcast chat. It's great having the odd session where just Emma and I get to chat to each other, and I hope you've enjoyed that. This is Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me and Emma Turner, and we'll be back very soon. Thank you very much for listening.